He felt like home. I just didn't realize I'd locked myself out of everything else I loved to stay in his house. My name is Lisa, and I'm 37 years old. When I first met Mark, it was like someone had finally turned the lights on in my life. He was charming, confident, and had this magnetic way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. I fell for him hard. And fast. Maybe too fast. My family never liked him. From the very beginning, they raised their eyebrows at his flashy stories, the way he spoke over me in conversations, how he didn't make much of an effort to get to know them. My mother was especially vocal. She'd say things like, "There's something off about that man, Lisa. I can feel it." But I didn't want to hear any of it. I told myself they were being overprotective, controlling even. I was a grown woman in love. I thought they should be happy for me. Instead, it felt like every family gathering turned into a battleground. My sister stopped inviting me to things. My dad grew quiet around me, and when I finally told them I was moving in with Mark, the silence was deafening. My mother cried. My brother said, "If you do this, don't expect us to pick up the pieces when it all falls apart." But I wasn't afraid of falling. I thought I was flying. The early months with Mark felt like a dream. We traveled, laughed, stayed up late talking about life, plans, dreams. He told me I was different, special, that he'd never met someone who made him feel this way. I wanted so badly to believe him, so I did. I cut myself off from the people who doubted us. Slowly, I stopped answering my sister's texts. I skipped birthdays, holidays, Sunday brunches. I started to believe the narrative Mark so gently spun. They don't understand you. They never have. But I do. I let him become my world, and in the process I watched my own world get smaller and smaller. Still, I was happy. Or at least I thought I was. Sometimes, late at night, I'd feel this strange ache in my chest, a tightness, like something was missing. I'd think about my mom's voice, the way my dad used to call me Pumpkin, my niece's little giggle. But I'd brush those thoughts away. I had chosen my path. I had Mark. And Mark loved me. At least I believed he did. If only I had known how temporary that feeling of safety was. If only I had listened, not to their warnings, but to my own silences, my own gut. But back then I didn't want the truth. I wanted the fantasy. Sometimes, the unraveling of a life doesn't start with a bang. It begins quietly, barely noticeable. That's how it was with Mark. At first, it was little things. He started coming home later than usual, claiming he had to stay late at work. He never used to bring work home, but now, his phone was glued to his hand. Even at the dinner table, he'd get texts and turn the screen away from me. When I asked about it, he'd just smirk and say, "Just business." I laughed it off, told myself not to be one of those women, the jealous, insecure kind. Mark had always told me how much he hated clingy women. I didn't want to give him a reason to think I'd become one. He also grew colder. Subtle things. He stopped complimenting me like he used to. He didn't reach for my hand when we walked together. He didn't really listen when I talked about my day. I'd ask how his day went, and his answers were short. Fine. Long. Tiring. But I kept telling myself he was just stressed, work pressure. Maybe I wasn't doing enough to support him, so I tried harder. I made his favorite dinners. I surprised him with little notes and gestures. I even suggested a weekend away, just the two of us, but he brushed it off, said we couldn't afford it. And still, I defended him, even when I caught a whiff of perfume that wasn't mine on his coat. Even when I found a strange earring under the passenger seat of his car, even when I heard him laughing in the other room, only for the call to go silent the moment I entered. He was just tired, busy, stressed. Wasn't he? One afternoon, I was at the grocery store when I ran into an old friend from college, Jenna. We hadn't seen each other in years. She looked surprised to see me, and honestly, I felt the same. We talked for a few minutes, and before she left, she said something that stuck with me. "You used to glow, Lisa. You don't anymore." That night, I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I barely recognized the woman staring back. My hair was tied up in a messy knot, my eyes dull, my shoulders hunched. I couldn't remember the last time I felt beautiful, or valued, or heard. I lay awake next to Mark, who was already asleep, face turned away from me. My hand hovered over his back for a moment, then fell back to my side. The space between us felt like a canyon. And yet, I still wasn't ready to believe he didn't love me. I wasn't ready to believe I had given everything up for a man who could be slipping away right in front of me. Have you ever loved someone so much that you started to doubt yourself before you doubted them? I did. Every day. And I told myself, tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow had other plans. Sometimes love blinds us. Other times we just close our own eyes. That's what I was doing. Closing my eyes and pretending everything was fine. I didn't want to see the cracks, because once you see them, you can't unsee them. And then you have to do something about them. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet, but the cracks were spreading. One night, Mark came home late again, hours late. No explanation, no call. When he finally walked through the door, he looked surprised that I was still awake. He reeked of expensive cologne and had that dazed, half-guilty smile plastered across his face. I asked where he had been. He shrugged. Out with some clients. It ran late. That was all. No apology, no details, just cold indifference. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, but instead I nodded like a fool and went to bed in silence. I curled up under the covers, facing the wall. My heart beat so loud it drowned out everything else. The next morning I found a lipstick stain on his shirt collar. It wasn't mine. I held the shirt in my hands, trembling. My chest felt like it had caved in. I stood in the laundry room for what felt like forever, staring at that crimson mark like it was a scarlet letter meant just for me. But still, I said nothing. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, some innocent, laughable misunderstanding. Maybe he leaned in to hug someone goodbye. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe. Later that week, I checked his phone while he was in the shower. My hands were shaking. My stomach felt sick. And there it was. A message thread with someone saved under the name Eric, but the messages didn't sound like anything you'd say to a man. They were flirtatious, intimate, full of emojis and secrets. One message burned into my memory. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I locked the phone and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, trying to breathe. How did I get here? How did I give up everything, my family, my friends, myself, for a man who could do this to me? I started to wonder, was it me? Was I not enough? Not pretty enough? Not exciting enough? Or had he always been like this and I just refused to see it? Be honest with me. If you found something like that on your partner's phone, would you confront them right away? Or would you freeze like I did, hoping the truth might somehow be untrue? Because I froze, and I hated myself for it. I felt like I was standing on a tightrope, balanced between denial and devastation. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. But eventually, life gives you a little push, and mine was coming sooner than I thought. I started counting lies the way I used to count blessings. 1. He said he had a business dinner but came home without his laptop and smelling like roses. 2. He claimed he fell asleep at the office, but I saw the Uber receipt on his phone from a luxury hotel. 3. He smiled at me in the morning like everything was fine, like he wasn't coming apart at the seams. I was unraveling, and no one could see it, not even Mark. I kept going to work, kept smiling at the neighbors, kept showing up for life, but inside, I was rotting. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I moved through the kitchen like a stranger. I cleaned dishes I hadn't used, made a bed I barely slept in, folded clothes that didn't even smell like us anymore. Then one night, I followed him. It was the ugliest version of myself I had ever seen. Paranoid, desperate, heartbroken. But I needed to know. I needed to stop pretending. He told me he was going to a late meeting. Instead, he drove to a quiet restaurant across town. He wasn't alone. I watched from my car as he pulled out a chair for a woman, tall, blonde, confident. She kissed him on the cheek like she belonged there. like she had every right to be a part of his world. I felt something crack inside me. Not just my heart, my pride. I had given this man my everything. I turned my back on my family, moved cities, started over from scratch just to be with him. And he discarded me like I was an inconvenience, like I was the mistake. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just planned. I began gathering small pieces of myself, one by one. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with my cousin Hannah, the only family member who still spoke to me after I chose Mark over them. I stopped canceling therapy appointments. I also stopped asking him where he was going. If he wanted to live a double life, he could do it in plain sight. I no longer cared to protect his lies. I started to save money in a hidden account under my maiden name. I dusted off my resume. I even applied for a part-time job at a bookstore near my old university, just to feel something of me again. I knew the confrontation was coming, but I wanted to meet it standing tall, not broken. I remember staring at myself in the mirror one morning, really staring. I looked older, not in years, in weight, in sorrow, in wisdom, and yet I saw someone stronger than she had ever been, not because of him, not even in spite of him, because of me, because I was finally done asking why he was doing this and started asking myself something better. What do I want? What does Lisa deserve? Let me ask you something. If you had been betrayed like this, would you wait for the truth to destroy you, or would you start preparing to survive it? Because I was done waiting. I was done being the woman who begged to be loved. Now I was becoming the woman who remembered how to love herself, and Mark had no idea who he was about to meet. I started keeping secrets of my own, little ones at first. I stopped texting him updates about my day. I no longer told him what time I'd be home. I deleted the shared calendar. It felt petty, but strangely powerful. Mark didn't even notice. He was so consumed with whatever double life he was building that he forgot to ask questions, and that silence gave me space to breathe. The bookstore job wasn't glamorous. I stocked shelves, rang up customers, and sometimes spent hours alone in the back organizing inventory. But every time I touched a book, every time I made a stranger smile, I felt alive. It was like parts of me were waking up, parts I didn't even know had gone to sleep. One day, I was restocking a display table when a young woman asked if I could recommend a book for someone going through heartbreak. I blinked and, without thinking, handed her Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. She read the back, looked at me, and said, "Thank you. You look like someone who's come through something." And I smiled. Because she was right. I was coming through it. Slowly, painfully, but I was coming through. At home, things got colder. Mark barely spoke to me, and I stopped pretending to care. We moved around each other like two shadows in the same house. Some nights he didn't come home at all. Other nights, he fell asleep on the couch fully dressed, his phone clutched in his hand like a weapon. I didn't ask. Instead, I kept writing in my journal. I wrote letters to my younger self, to my mother, to the version of me who thought Mark was everything. I wrote about the pain, but I also wrote about the hope. I reconnected with an old professor from college, someone who always believed I'd do great things. He offered to mentor me if I ever wanted to apply to grad school again. I hadn't thought about that path in years, but suddenly it didn't seem so impossible. One morning I made coffee just for myself. I didn't leave a cup for Mark like I used to. He came into the kitchen, looked at the lone mug in my hand, and raised an eyebrow. "No coffee for me?" he asked. I shrugged. "I figured you already had some wherever you were last night." He didn't respond, just stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. But neither did I, and I loved that. Let me ask you this. When someone who once made you feel special starts making you feel invisible, what do you do? Do you disappear? Or do you remind yourself you were always worth seeing? I was done disappearing. I was no longer shrinking to fit inside his world. Instead, I was building one of my own, one chapter, one morning, one brave step at a time. And I had a feeling he wasn't going to like where this story was going. One night, Mark stumbled in just past midnight. His shirt was wrinkled, his breath sour with liquor and something I didn't want to name. Lipstick smudged faintly near his collar. I stared at it like it was a stop sign. "You're still awake?" he muttered, clearly annoyed. I didn't answer. I just stood there, holding my journal in one hand and a quiet fury in the other. "I had a long day," he said, tossing his keys onto the counter like I was the housemaid. "So did I," I replied. "Only, I spent mine remembering who I was before you." He flinched, not because of the words, but because of how calm I was when I said them. Mark had always been a master of deflection, but that night his tactics started to fail. He couldn't argue with a woman who no longer feared him. "You've changed," he said, narrowing his eyes. "No," I whispered. "I just stopped changing for you." His silence thundered. Later that week, I found an unfamiliar necklace tangled in the bedsheets. I held it between my fingers, light catching the tiny heart-shaped pendant, and laughed. A bitter, hollow sound I hadn't heard from myself in years. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream or throw things or collapse into sobs like I used to. Instead, I opened my laptop and filled out an application for a creative writing program I'd once dreamed of joining. I clicked Submit with the same hand that had once written wedding vows. The next morning, I told Mark I'd be sleeping in the guest room indefinitely. He didn't argue. He just nodded, as if he'd been waiting for this to happen. That weekend, I volunteered at a women's shelter for the first time. I sat in a circle of strangers who told stories that made mine sound almost gentle, but in every broken sentence, I saw a reflection of myself, and I saw women who had lost everything and still stood tall. It reminded me that pain doesn't make us weak. Silence does. So I spoke up. I began writing my story, chapter by chapter, turning pain into prose. I shared parts anonymously online, nothing dramatic, just pieces of a woman remembering her own worth, and women responded. They said they felt seen, less alone. One wrote, "I thought I was crazy. Thank you for reminding me I'm not." Reading that message made me cry, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I knew I mattered. Even if only to one person, it was enough. Tell me honestly, have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, even when it was tearing you apart inside? What happened when you finally decided to speak? By the end of the month, I was spending more time outside the house than in it, at work, at the shelter, at workshops, at long, quiet dinners by myself where I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. I wasn't trying to punish Mark. I was simply remembering how it felt to live, and I had a growing suspicion that the life I was rediscovering didn't include him anymore. I moved out on a Wednesday. It wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no packed suitcases hurled downstairs. Just a quiet morning where I loaded a few boxes into the back of my car while Mark stood in the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't try to stop me. And that silence, it said everything. I rented a small apartment above a used bookstore. The floors creaked and the walls were thin, but it was mine. The first night, I curled up on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, surrounded by unpacked boxes and scented candles I'd never been allowed to light before. I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Freedom didn't roar, it whispered. At work, people noticed the change. I smiled more. I spoke up in meetings. I took initiative, started a new project that had been pushed aside for months. My manager complimented my leadership for the first time in years. Even my clothes changed. I wore colors again. Real lipstick. Heels when I felt like it. It was as if I'd finally peeled off the version of myself I had worn for Mark's comfort. I also kept writing. The story I had started, my story, grew into something more. I was invited to speak at a local community event for women who had experienced emotional abuse. The moment I stepped onto that small stage, I shook like a leaf. But then I looked out and saw faces full of quiet hope. Some eyes welled up with tears before I'd even spoken a word. I told them about the necklace in the sheets, about the silence in our home, about losing my voice and fighting like hell to get it back. I told them about finding my name again, not in his words, but in my own. Afterwards, a woman my age came up to me and whispered, "I've been afraid to leave for 10 years, But after hearing you, I think I can. That moment changed something inside me. Mark texted a few times. At first he was cold, then nostalgic, then angry, but I didn't respond. What would I even say? That I'd finally learned to love myself more than I feared being alone? I didn't owe him closure. I owed myself a future. I enrolled in that writing program I had applied to weeks before. When I got the acceptance email, I sat at my kitchen table and cried, really cried. Not from pain, but from pride. You know what's strange? I used to think that starting over meant losing everything, but I didn't lose myself. I found her. In the silence, in the small choices, in the courage to walk away when love turned into a cage. Have you ever felt that moment when staying became harder than leaving? What finally pushed you to choose yourself? Now, my apartment is filled with books, plants I keep alive somehow, and soft music that plays while I write. No one tells me when to come home. No one sighs when I speak. No one touches my things and calls them his. I thought I'd miss him. I don't. What I missed all along was me. They say healing isn't a straight path, and they're right. Some mornings I still wake up expecting to hear his footsteps. Sometimes I instinctively lower my voice, afraid to say too much. And occasionally I glance at my phone, half expecting one of his cold messages. But those moments are fewer now. Most days I wake up in my sunlit apartment, pour my coffee, and sit at my little desk by the window. I write, I breathe, I feel whole. I recently finished the short story I started in the middle of the chaos. It's not about him, it's about me, a woman who gave up everything for a man, only to find everything when she finally gave him up. That story has been read by hundreds of women now. Some even wrote back. They said it gave them courage, that it made them feel seen. Isn't it strange how something broken can still become something beautiful? I think back to the girl who once believed she couldn't live without him, who walked away from her family, her friends, her dreams, just to be with someone who slowly erased her. That girl didn't know she was brave, but she was. I was. If you've ever loved someone so much that you forgot to love yourself, I hope you remember this. You are not weak for leaving. You are strong for surviving. Today, I talked to my parents again. It took time, but they forgave me. Not because I deserved it, but because love sometimes waits for you to come home. I've started hosting a weekly women's circle at the library. It's small, just tea, a few chairs, and stories shared between women who know what it means to rebuild. We laugh, we cry, and we remind each other that pain doesn't have the last word. Sometimes, after everyone leaves, I linger for a few minutes. I look at the empty chairs, and I think about all the versions of myself that once sat there. Silenced, afraid, small, but not anymore. Now I speak, I write, I live, fully and unapologetically. And you, whoever you are, wherever you are, if you're going through something similar, I want you to know. It gets better. Not all at once, not easily. But piece by piece, you find your way back to yourself. If you've ever had to fight to reclaim your voice, your worth, your life, then you know what it means to rise again. So, from one woman to another, thank you for listening to my story. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, from women who've faced betrayal, heartbreak, and silence, but refused to be defined by it, subscribe to this channel. And if you want more women to find these stories, women like us who've been hurt but are still standing, don't forget to like this video. We may all carry different scars, but we carry them with the same strength, because no matter what they take from us, we rise again.